Stevens Residence Hall, a fancy-looking dorm right in the middle of Washington State University's campus. Just a short walking distance from the Chinook Student Center, this building is the oldest dorm on the west side of the Mississippi. It has housed around 60 students each academic year since 1895. What once was a home for livelihood and tradition now stands as a faint echo since the building closed its doors to students 2 years ago. In the spring of 2020, classes at WSU were canceled and transferred to an online platform due to the COVID-19 pandemic. With students taking classes for an entire academic year after the initial shutdown, Stevens Hall remained closed to incoming students. Brandon Brackett, the Associate Director of Residence Life, is one of those faculty members responsible for the decision to close Stevens.
Stevens is actually a much smaller hall. It's older and takes more finances to keep running and maintain. It just made sense given that it only houses a little over 60 students and it costs more to upkeep during the year that was one of the halls of a number of halls that we just kept closed for this year.
Stevens Hall is one of the 4 residential buildings that remain closed. In response to the initial strike of the pandemic, Brandon created a chart that progressively opened residence halls as admissions went up.
We just don't have the funds. And so it's a combination of like upkeep and staffing needs that determine the rankings or the order that I came up with.
Seeing as the number of admissions hasn't increased within the past few years, Stevens remains closed. According to WSU manuscripts, Stevens Hall was built in the summer of 1895 and named after the first territorial governor of Washington, Isaac Stevens. It was constructed for less than $20,000 out of brick manufactured from clay deposits on the site and local basalt. Because of its ancient structure, the building requires a lot of maintenance.
It's like having an old car, right? Like you fix some of the parts, but you never know what next part's going to break, right? Because it's all the same age.
Besides being an old building in the Pullman campus of WSU, Stevens Hall holds so many valuable memories that many former students cherish. Elise Kapsi is a current WSU student completing her 3rd year on campus. She lived in Stevens from August 2019 to the beginning of March 2020, just when the COVID pandemic shut down WSU classes. She shares her first initial reaction to Stevens closing its doors to students.
I was really sad because when I first found out I was living here, I was a little bit disappointed because I didn't know anything about the dorms. And then I got here and I loved living here so much. So I was really sad because I feel like it's such a good location. It has so much character and personality. The girls that lived here were always so fun and so nice and like quiet and chill. And I was just like sad that no one else got to like live that.
Although Elise's time at Stevens was cut short, she remembers her time on the hillside of campus fondly.
It's the quirkiest building I've probably ever been in on this campus. There's all these like little nooks and crannies, and all the rooms are like, they're either the tiniest room you've ever seen or the biggest room you've ever seen, but in the weirdest shape possible. So I lived in this like super oblong room with my freshman roommate Ashley, and it was just funny. Like it was always just like funny to like find little nooks and crannies, and like there's like little places to study, and it's just very charming. Every person that I brought here was always like, "This is where you live?" And I was like, "Yes."
According to WSU's housing website, this older building steeps in tradition, which helps residents grow into thriving women. Due to the hall's small community, the residents form close bonds, and many choose to live in Stevens all 4 years while attending WSU. One of those alumni that decided to stay during her entire undergrad is Heather Brackett. She lived in the building from 2002 to 2005.
It's an interesting building. It has a really interesting history, and it's such a shame, that there are people who are missing out on living there. I'm worried about the traditions not continuing on. That was another thing I really liked about Stevens, is just the traditional things that we did.
The traditions that Heather references have been put to a screeching halt since the COVID pandemic closed the doors of Stevens, but they're remembered fondly. Heather shares the tradition of serenades.
So how you do a serenade, whoever was in charge, for whatever reason, would pick out the songs. There was always 3 songs. You knew, like, your hall knew when it was, but the other hall did not. And so you're like rounding everybody up. You're going down, and this is like, oh, Colleen, it was in the ancient times where like burning your own CDs was like a cool new thing you could do.
Serenades at Stevens Hall would be an exchange surprise visit with a brother hall, which would typically be any all-boys hall at WSU.
And you just start making a whole bunch of noise, and then like everybody knows that like it's a serenade, and so they all come out, and then you you sit, you push the song and you just like, you sing and there's like motions.
Heather, like so many former Stevens residents, is concerned about the closing of the building and the halt of the traditions that made their time at WSU so memorable.
You know, my husband's a director, interim director of residence life. So I regularly share my opinion with him about like, you gonna open that building back up again?
Looking at the future of Stevens Residence Hall, it will remain closed as long as enrollment numbers stay down. The decision to open doors now lies in the hands of Washington State University students, and if they decide to enroll in in-person classes or not.